This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Former Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi dies during a court session. Dozens killed in triple suicide attack in northeast Nigeria. And leaders representing various interests look for a common way of resolving the Libyan conflict as they meet in Cairo. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Ucha joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Boeing executives take turns to apologize for the loss of lives in the two 737 MAX crashes. And Zimbabwe's annual inflation rises to a 10-year high of 97.85%. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Ucha. We begin the broadcast in Egypt with some breaking news. Former Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi has collapsed and he has subsequently died in court, according to state television. The 67-year-old was in court after the conclusion of a trial session in an espionage case. He was being prosecuted while in custody and was facing several charges. Morsi was a top figure in the Muslim Brotherhood and took office in 2012 as the country's first democratically elected leader. He was toppled by the military a year later after mass protests against his rule. He had been serving a 7-year sentence for falsifying his candidacy application for the 2012 presidential race. Well, Yasser Hakim now joins us in Egypt. Some dramatic developments there in Egypt. What more can you tell us about Morsi's death?
Yes, obviously it's a shock to everyone here because there were no signs or symptoms beforehand. However, obviously the details are not out yet. What we understand is the public prosecutor will be issuing a statement very soon, giving us more details about the cause of death. What we understand is that he was given the room to speak by the judge during the session. He wanted to speak to defend himself. He did speak and he was given the word. And then after the session ended, he fainted, he collapsed and died and was sent to the hospital for further steps concerning procedures for his death. And we're waiting for more information to come anytime soon concerning any details about his death.
And Yasser, how has this news been received in Egypt?
Obviously, he's been a controversial figure. The leader of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood that has been branded a terrorist organization here in Egypt and in several Arab countries as well. So this, yes, is a shock, obviously, but also you would not find a lot of reactions from Egyptians here to his death, being obviously on trial for espionage, for killing civilian protesters during demonstrations in 2013 in front of the presidential palace, and also for escaping the jail sentence where he was in jail in 2011 and he escaped jail during the revolution, the 2011 uprising. So his track record is not of someone who's been popular, obviously being ousted by a popular uprising in 2013 shows that it's not going to be given the highlight of the day. Obviously, his death came at age of 67, so he's not too old for this, and there was expected to be more courts and trials for him. and people were waiting for the final verdict for several trials. He was in the appeals stage of the trials, so there were still some years to go ahead for him and the court cases, because they usually take years in Egypt. So it is a shock. It is obviously something that has taken people by surprise, but we will be waiting to see if there will be any reaction from the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood itself and the members of the Brotherhood, what their reaction will be in the next few hours to the news of his death.
And finally, yes, what happens next?
We'll be waiting. I think the statement by the public prosecutor will give us details about what's the next steps. Obviously, all the court cases now will be dropped because he is not available anymore. Court cases will continue with the other members of the Muslim Brotherhood, the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, and the other leaders. What kind of funeral he will be getting, we'll still be waiting to see what kind of funeral he'll be receiving, and his family. So all these details are still too early. The news of his death just came less than an hour ago, so we're still going to know more details about what will happen in the next few hours.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was Yasser Hakim in Cairo, and that's following the death of the former Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi in court. Moving on to other news now, to northeast Nigeria, where at least 30 people have died following a triple suicide bombing attack in Borno State. Over 40 people were injured in the bomb blasts. The attacks took place Sunday evening in Konduga village. The three suicide bombers detonated their devices as people watched a football match at a viewing centre. It's the biggest mass killing by suicide bombers this year. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks, and most of those killed have already been buried, while several survivors are still in hospital in Maiduguri. The government has yet to release an official statement regarding these attacks.
We were all here at about 8 p.m. yesterday, and we had a loud sound. We were confused and checking what the sound was. People were running helter-skelter. Later we heard that people died. Some were injured. We stayed behind to tidy up things after. Then we left. I lost a friend.
So all our efforts to reach Congo yesterday could not. It's not fruitful because of security checkups and what they do. So this morning we tried our best to come, but still we kept at the gate for actually 1 or 2 hours. People get access to Congo. On reaching the scene of the incident, we found out that there's a lot of casualties.
Well, earlier we talked to CGTN's Philahaza about these suicide bomb blasts, as well as the measures Nigeria's military is taking to combat militancy.
What we know is that there was indeed a bomb blast, actually multiple bomb blasts in the northeastern part of Nigeria, Borno State, a village known as Konduga, which is about 25 kilometers to the capital, Maiduguri. Now, a couple of people were watching a football game at a viewing center, and that was late into the Sunday evening, and a suicide bomber tried to gain entrance into the viewing center, but local sources say the operator of the viewing center had a bit of a scuttle with the first bomber, and he let go of his IED, while the other two, who were not far from the viewing center, also let theirs, exploded there. So at the instant, 17 people lost their lives, and after a couple of hours or so, as a result of a lack of immediate medical attention, the casualties rose to 30. So the State Emergency Management Agency, the head of operations, Usman Kachala, confirmed that at least 30 people have died and 40 more are injured. Well, you would have to recall that in 2015, the Nigerian military relocated its command center to the northeastern part of the country, to Borno State, specifically to see how that they can control and reduce as much as possible the attacks, the threats from the insurgents. And that happened in 2015, and it has remarkably gained some traction in the fight against insurgency, which actually started in Borno State and has been on for 10 years. There's a heavy presence of military in the Borno State. There's been several airstrikes by the Nigerian Air Force on alleged strongholds of the terrorists in the northern part of the country. Also, the reason why the government claims that it has decimated the terrorist group is the fact that before 2015, or about that time, before the command center was relocated to the northeastern part of the country, the militants had control of some sorts of territories in the northeastern part of the country, about 17 local governments. But now they cannot boast of controlling any of those local governments. That's why they indulge in attacks of soft targets, churches, mosques, crowded areas, marketplaces, like the viewing center that we saw, on Sunday. So these are just, progress reports from the military saying that they are combating the terrorists. But, security analysts have said that apart from the the military might, physical presence of the military, there has to be more proactive approaches to gather intelligence, to sensitize the populace on avoiding recruits or avoiding that opportunity for the Boko Haram insurgents to recruit them and use them for these kind of attacks in the future.
In the past week, at least 161 people have been killed and scores of others displaced in tribal clashes that broke out in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Authorities say the clashes between the Lendu and Hema ethnic groups were sparked by the killing of 4 businessmen. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa has more from Kinshasa.
The ethnic clashes between the Lendu and the Hema took place in Jugu town in Ituri province. 50 people were initially reported dead in the reprisal attacks. Locals say the fighting was sparked by the killing of 4 Lendu businessmen last week. Officials now say the death toll has shot up to 161 following a resurgence of the fighting. Civil society members in the area, however, say they found 200 bodies in the villages. The conflict between the Hema cattle keepers and the Lendu farmers is a long-running one that left thousands of people dead between 1999 and 2007. The two ethnic groups have been fighting over land and political representation for years. The Congolese army and the police have been deployed to quell the fighting. Several arrests have been made. Ituri province has had a long history of conflict. The latest series of clashes has happened at a time when the region is struggling to contain a deadly Ebola outbreak that has killed more than 1,400 people since August last year. Chris Ochemringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Tribal leaders, parliamentarians and politicians from the east and the west of Libya have gathered in Cairo. They're seeking a unified stance on the ongoing conflict in their country. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more.
The war in Libya is the backdrop for this meeting of influential tribal leaders and parliament members. The Cairo meeting is aimed at creating a unified stance toward the divisive political conflict in Libya.
This conference is gathering the Libyan national forces. We are here, and our main concern is how to rid the country of the Muslim Brotherhood, of terrorism, Al-Qaeda, and the militias with the help of the Libyan National Army. We are also ending our differences and coordinating efforts so we can unite to restore stability in the country.
The Libyan National Army, led by General Khalifa Haftar, is on the outskirts of the capital, Tripoli. It says it is fighting terrorism and extremist militias that are backed by the government of national accord. And the politicians here have rejected an initiative for talks and elections announced by Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj on Sunday.
We completely refuse the initiative by the head of the Presidential Council, Fayez al-Sarraj, which is only meant to prolong the Libyan crisis, because there's no mention in the initiative of disarming and dissolving the militias in the country. The Libyan army should be the only military entity that protects the Libyan people, not the militias.
Meanwhile, efforts by the international community are still continuing to try to bring both sides to the negotiating table and end the conflict in Libya peacefully. With the strong popularity of these tribal leaders, the meetings here could tip the balance of public opinion towards the Libyan National Army, which has received wide support from the tribal leaders in Cairo. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, the head of Libya's UN-backed Government of National Accord, Fayez al-Sarraj, has announced a new political initiative and promised elections in a bid to move the country forward after 8 years of chaos. He's also proposed a forum held in coordination with the UN mission to address Libya's crisis.
I present today a political initiative for a way out of this crisis. I call the Libyan people to gather and continue the national struggle and the project of building a democratic state. We have decided during this forum what will be the future roadmap for Libya, and we will create the suitable constitutional law to hold presidential and parliamentary elections before the end of 2019.
The next African Union summit is scheduled for next month in Niamey in Niger. Leading up to this main event, initial gatherings are first being held in Addis Ababa, where the AU is headquartered. The latest session of the Permanent Representatives Committee is already underway. The theme of this year's summit is refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons. CGTN's Giram Challa has more.
The African Union has chosen its 2019 theme to be refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons. Of course, this is to address the alarming refugee and IDP situation in the continent. The Niger summit is expected to evaluate works done throughout the year in addressing forced displacement in Africa.
The theme is both a challenge as well as it is summoning us to find a very quick solution to the spiral of forced displacement in the different theaters of conflict. If we do not control this and rein in this situation, then it will undermine very seriously our march, our resolute march toward the harmonious integration of the continent.
When African heads of state and governments meet in Niger, they will spend most of their time deliberating on the Continental Free Trade Area and the much anticipated reform of the Union. This reform is hoped to make the African Union Commission a much efficient and people-centered body.
Our meetings are entrusted as well to consider the proposal of the new organizational structure of the African Union Commission with a view to enhancing the efficiency and agility of the African House. These distinct and unique responsibilities are added to a myriad of other issues of great importance, including the follow-up on the work of the Peace Fund, the implementation of the Agenda 2063, and the selection of the 2020 theme of the year.
The African Union calls its upcoming meeting the first mid-year coordination meeting of the African Union and the Regional Economic Communities, also known as REX. In January this year, the 32nd Assembly had decided all mid-year gatherings of leaders to be used to follow up the implementation of decisions made every January here in Addis Ababa. This time, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will also be on the spotlight. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Uganda steps up efforts to vaccinate people who may have come into contact with relatives of 2 people who died of Ebola. And how dry weather conditions have left millions at risk of starvation in the Eastern Africa region.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Kenya's Ministry of Health says tests on a suspected Ebola case have turned out negative. It says the results from blood samples taken from a woman who was admitted in an isolation unit in Kericho County Referral Hospital show no trace of the Ebola virus disease and other viral hemorrhagic fevers. World Health Organization and Ugandan health officials have begun vaccinating people who may have come into contact with the relatives of the two people who died of Ebola last week, including a 5-year-old boy confirmed to be suffering from the disease. The cases in Uganda mark the first time the virus crossed an international border since the current outbreak began in the Democratic Republic of Congo last August.
A World Health Organization panel decided not to declare an international emergency over Congo's Ebola outbreak despite its spread to Uganda, concluding such a declaration would cause too much economic harm and perpetuate existing fears among an already wary population.
If we get vaccination against Ebola, then we let's pray to God, because the message I got from those people in Congo, I hear for them, they were thinking as if Ebola was something like, they are witches, and they could hide information. That is what I hear.
The viral disease, however, spreads through contact with bodily fluids, causing hemorrhagic fever with severe vomiting, diarrhea and bleeding. A 5-year-old boy and his grandmother died while receiving care in Uganda following contraction of the disease while in the DRC. The global body has now launched an aggressive vaccination program to stem the spread of the disease.
These are people in the community where the confirmed case was staying. And of course, they were here. They came from DRC and came and stayed in this place for a short time though. So we know there are definitely people who came into contact with them, their family, the neighbors, the friends, all living around this village. So the strategy is that once that happens, then we come in and do what we're calling vaccination of these contacts of contacts.
The cases recorded in Uganda this week were all of people who had arrived from the DRC. This reality has introduced some concern within the residents in the affected community.
I request at least to get this vaccine as a village, because people, they are scared, because the person who come from Congo, he dropped here and that time and he gone, but people, they are scared, so they request to get that vaccine so that it must be protected.
They are willing to take up the vaccine. It is a harmless vaccine, it's given the same way we give all the other vaccines, so there shouldn't be anything unusual. And they understand it's for their benefit, so that they are able to stay healthy and save their lives.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's epidemic is the second worst ever, with 2,108 cases of Ebola and 1,411 deaths since August. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, a team of US scientists are working on what could be a breakthrough in the fight against malaria. Scientists are using genetically engineered fungus, as well as a toxin found in spider venom, to fight against pesticide-resistant mosquitoes.
As mosquitoes become more resistant to pesticides, scientists are looking for alternative methods. A US-based team of scientists is experimenting with how genetically engineered fungus can provide a breakthrough in the fight against malaria. After successful lab trials, the US team is conducting further experiments in Burkina Faso.
We grow this fungus and we use this fungus to impregnate the cloth. Then we take the mosquitoes and put them in contact with this cloth, which contains the fungus, and then these mosquitoes will also absorb the spores. The spores will germinate, and then start to kill the mosquitoes. So we discovered that it will even kill the mosquitoes that are hyper-resistant to all the pesticides we use today.
The team has created a simulated village named Mosquito Sphere.
Well, basically within 2 generations, we've killed 99% of the mosquitoes. So we caused the mosquito population to collapse.
The simulated village was created near Soumousso, a village in southern Burkina Faso. Draman, a villager in Soumousso, lost his child to malaria.
Losing a child was really painful for me, or for any parent for that matter. So if we can find a solution against this disease, which killed my child and other people's children, we will thank God. They should do everything to eradicate this disease. They should help us. We have hope, and we're happy with the project so far.
According to the World Health Organization, nearly half of the world's population could be at risk of contracting malaria. Astatal, CGTN.
To environmental matters now, the effects of drought and desertification are evident in the East African region. A delay in the long rainy season has put millions at risk of starvation. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
The season to date is among the top 3 driest on record in southern and eastern Kenya, southern Somalia and central northern Uganda. Much of Eastern Africa received little or no rainfall in the early part of the year, sparking fears of a prolonged drought, with rainfall during the 2019 long rain season recording well below average across much of the Greater Horn of Africa. This resulted in a significant crop and livestock loss and increased food prices. Part of the reason for this was Tropical Cyclone Idai, which disrupted the rainfall system from East Africa. But despite conditions improving, below-average food production in agricultural areas is expected. According to Relief Web, rising food prices and low agricultural labor demand will reduce food availability and access. Experts point to climate change as the cause of unpredictable weather patterns. This is already putting a strain on water resources and grazing land, leading to conflict amongst pastoralist communities. Maize harvests are expected to be significantly below average in Kenya's marginal agricultural areas, though the longer rainfall season in high potential areas will realize near average production. In southern Somalia and eastern Ethiopia, below average rain-fed production is also expected. Rain in the Ethiopian highlands is expected to increase Somalia's river water levels and support irrigation. Uganda is also expected to experience some deficits, especially in the eastern and central regions that contribute 40 to 60% of annual production. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, earlier we spoke to Gino Teofilo, the head of communications at the Norwegian Refugee Council in East Africa. He shared his views on the impact of drought in the East Africa region.
The situation in East Africa is definitely serious, and it's getting more critical. We have several countries which are badly affected. This includes eastern Ethiopia, northern Kenya, Uganda, and the worst affected is Somalia. In Somalia alone, there are 2.6 million people who are affected. They've fled their homes due to drought, not only the current drought, but also past droughts and due to conflict. So we have all of these people who are surviving in makeshift camps and makeshift shelters. They're short on food, short on water, and there is some aid reaching these areas, but there is not enough aid to go around. So the crisis is expected to get worse. Climate change is definitely one of the problems that we're seeing, which is making this situation worse. I've spoke to older Somalis who've told me, yes, when I was a child, there would be a drought like every 8 years. Now it seems like there's a drought every other year. The droughts are getting more frequent, but also deforestation is a serious problem. For example, in Somalia, when you've had so many people flee their homes, you have people now they're taking shelter somewhere. Well, they need to cook and keep warm, so they cut down all the trees. And also there's the charcoal business. That has led to deforestation as well. So these have created a vicious cycle of making things worse. There's been conflict in Somalia for so long, and there's been increasing frequency of droughts. So this is making the situation worse. Well, planting trees, of course, would help to reverse the desertification, but that wouldn't help the families who fled their homes much. What would help more is doing programs which are called resilience programs. So these help communities to survive droughts, to stay in their communities. Norwegian Refugee Council, we are doing some programs like this, which include solar-powered wells, which are bringing water to not one but several villages. So this way they're able to stay healthier and to survive better. Other very important programs include agricultural support for programs such as drought-resistant crops. So if you are giving farmers who have lost all their crops, you give them drought-resistant seeds, you give them fertilizers, they are able to replant. That way they don't have to borrow money and go into debt. So they are able to get the next crop growing and they are able to survive better.
To Ethiopia now. A Chinese veterinary expert recently helped a cattle farmer to treat one of his bulls. The farmer had reported that the bull suddenly stopped urinating for 2 or 3 days. Unable to find a solution, the farmer drove the bull nearly 10 kilometers to seek help from a group of Chinese vets. What was first suspected to be urinary tract stones turned out instead to be inflammatory hyperplasia. A third of the agricultural population in the country is engaged in animal husbandry. However, due to insufficient feed and disease, the mortality rate is over 20% annually and can reach as high as 40%. At the Allegay at Vet College, Chinese experts treat 5 to 10 cases a day and also provide training for local vets. Since 2001, the Chinese government has sent over 450 agricultural vocational teachers to Ethiopia.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow and waterfall surges down the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
Well, let's now go to Ucha for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Boeing executives take turns to apologize for the loss of lives in 2 737 MAX crashes. And Zimbabwe's annual inflation rises to a 10-year high of 97.85%.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, Boeing executives have taken turns to apologize for the loss of life in the two 737 MAX crashes and, of course, pledged to apply lessons of the crisis to future planes. Now, this happened during the opening of the Paris Air Show. Executives from the finance, jetliner, defense and service sectors added their voices to apologies for the 346 deaths. Now, they also touted the strength of the overall aerospace and defense market. Boeing has been criticized for what some PR experts consider a lawyer-driven response to the 3-month-old MAX crisis. Chief Executive Dennis Muilenburg said the company is approaching the Paris Air Show with humility and is stressing safety as its top priority.
The tragedy of Lion Air and Ethiopian accidents certainly weighs on all of us, and words simply cannot express the sorrow and the sympathy that we feel for the families and the loved ones of those that were lost in these tragic accidents. These accidents have only intensified our efforts to ensure the highest level of safety and quality in everything we do. We're committed to learning from this and have teams working 24 hours, 7 days a week to ensure that we're meeting the needs and the priorities of our regulators and our customers around the globe.
As we've said, center first on a safe return of the MAX to service. We will also be continually relentless on our commitments to quality and to safety across our production and our development programs. We continue to make steady progress on the 777X development program with 2 airplanes, our first 2 that have rolled out of the factory. And let me assure you, we are incredibly focused on making sure any lesson learned that comes out of the 737 MAX will be applied to the 777X and any future development program.
And still at the Paris Air Show, aeronautics company Airbus has unveiled its long-range version of the A321neo jet. Now, the European firm aims to carve out new routes for airlines and compete with Boeing's plans for a possible new mid-market jet. The fleet is the longest-range narrow-body jetliner, which will maximize airlines' flexibility and efficiency. The annual Paris Air Show is traditionally a match between Airbus and Boeing sales teams in the $150 billion a year commercial aircraft market. However, analysts predict slow economies, trade tensions and geopolitical uncertainties have subdued the event this year.
This is the A321 XLR, ladies and gentlemen. It is an aircraft capable of 4,700 nautical miles of range in a typical longer range configuration. That would be 2-class configuration. It is therefore, by definition, for ranges like this, the lowest risk investment deployment for an airline opening new routes in that sector range.
Well, let's head back to the continent. Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate has increased to a 10-year high of about 97.85%, and that's in May. And that's, of course, from 75.86% the previous month. Now, data reports show prices rose 12.54% during the same period, compared to 5.52% in April. Back in February, the country's Reserve Bank scrapped the one-to-one peg between its quasi-currency bond note and electronic dollars against the US dollar. Now, this resulted in a merge into a single transitional currency called the RTGS dollar. Following the adoption of the new currency, Zimbabwe rebased its economy in an effort to boost it. However, the country has in recent times experienced a severe dollar crunch that has resulted in shortages of commodities. Meanwhile, the Egyptian government has approved a new small and medium enterprises law that is, of course, aimed at facilitating procedures for those with small and medium businesses. Here's Yasser Hakim shedding some light on that new law.
Ahmed Eid has a workshop to produce handmade cotton rugs, covers and decorations out of recycled material.
Everything here is handmade. I produce myself. I learned a trade from my father. The raw material is all waste from several cotton, clothes and textile factories. It's recycled. I dye it in different colors and produce different products according to clients' needs.
The workshop has been open for more than 10 years. Ahmed says he wants to expand and grow, but regulations have been hindering progress.
The demand is so high for my products not just in Cairo but in Sharm el-Sheikh and Hag Ada. That's because we are only a few who are specialized in this. I wish to have a larger place with more equipment, manpower and materials. I can't because of the bureaucracy, taxes and cost. I can't take a loan because of stringent bank guarantees and procedures.
A new law approved by the government aims at solving these issues.
The lawmakers are aware of these many challenges. For the financing issue, for example, not only banks will be providing loans, but NGOs are now allowed to provide soft loans with favorable conditions. Allocating a plot of land at any requested location for the business has become much faster too.
SMEs are the base for economic development and job creation, and the government hopes proposed facilities will encourage more people to establish small businesses.
The law has a whole chapter on the incentives for the SMEs. I believe the most important aspects are that there is a one-stop shop. Once the entrepreneur submits the documents, he receives the license right away. Equally important is that there will be tax exemptions on all new projects.
The tax cuts and incentives in the new law are also aimed at encouraging the businesses in the huge informal sector to be included in the formal economy and help to support the budget deficit. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Airtel Africa has set a price range of $1.01 and $1.26 for its planned initial public offering on the London Stock Exchange. The Indian unit's IPO is expected to raise about $749 million from the issuance of between 595 million to 744 million new shares. Now, the company says the price range values it between $3.79 billion and $4.55 billion. Airtel Africa also says it intends to list its shares on the Nigerian Stock Exchange at the same time as the London listing. Conditional dealings in its shares are expected to begin on or around June 28th, and the final pricing will be announced the same day. Now, a direct flight between Nairobi and Kenya and Changsha, the capital of Hunan province in China, has brought the two parties closer. Guo Che, the economic and commercial counselor from the Chinese embassy in Kenya, says the direct flight brings not only geographical convenience, but also the benefit of economic and trade exchanges between the two nations.
Although there are not many Hunan enterprises in Kenya, Watsa believes that with the deepening of the cooperation between the two and the direct flight, Kenya, as the transportation and trade hub of Central and East Africa, will become a major trading partner of Hunan.
We believe that small and medium-sized private enterprises in Hunan will find opportunities for their development in Kenya. More enterprises will invest in Kenya and Africa.
In 2018, the total import and export between Hunan and Kenya increased by 72% year-on-year. In the very first 2 months of this year, 10 Hunan-based enterprises invested more than $50 million in Kenya. Kenya is also seeking opportunities to export agricultural products to China.
With the opening of CAETE, the trade between the two sides will provide a good opportunity for Kenya's agricultural products to export to China.
The The direct flight also provides favorable conditions for tourism and people-to-people exchanges between Hunan and Kenya.
Many tourists can take the flight to experience the magic of the East African savannas. And we hope that more Kenyan friends will visit China on this flight.
Kenya is not the only beneficiary of the win-win trade relationship with China. Since April 2001, the Chinese government has sent 456 agricultural vocational teachers to Ethiopia for 19 consecutive years. They have covered 56 specialized courses, trained 6,000 local teachers and agricultural technicians, and brought more than 200 practical technologies to rural areas of Ethiopia through the vocational education system. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, Egypt signs and agrees to a $500 million settlement with Israel's Electric Corporation over a defunct natural gas deal. Of course, all that and more coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ucha. We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including why children in South Sudan want to be more involved in charting the future of their country.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
On June the 16th, every year since 1991, countries across Africa commemorate the Day of the African Child. This year, the theme was Humanitarian Action in Africa, Children's Rights First. Students in Juba took to radio to spread awareness on education and the importance of their voice in solving the country's problems. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has the details.
Elizabeth Aguil reads the first news bulletin of the day.
This is Radio Mariah News. I am Elizabeth Aguil. The headlines. Ministry of Health appeals for $12 million for the fight against Ebola. UN Security Council to discuss solution in Sudan. And authorities in Awil East State plan to establish centers for children living on the streets.
She is one of 16 South Sudanese students from various secondary schools who took over the airwaves at the United Nations Radio Mariah.
It was very interesting reading the news, and it was even a live experience.
These students highlighted their concerns as they demanded right to education for both boys and girls.
I think children should dream, and they should have hopes, and they should have dreams. And I think it's for us to try and fulfill those dreams.
The children are the future. We should all work together to prepare this future. If we expect a bright future, let's invest in the future right now. And the future is children. Let's ensure that all violations against children are eradicated. It's very simple. It requires education, it requires commitment, and it requires resources.
An official from the United Nations Children's Fund underscored the importance of giving children a voice.
Children should speak up about the issues that are affecting their lives. I understand it can be challenging because I know that in some areas and some places they're not used to being listened to. But it's important that they're exercising their right to speak up and getting used to having their voice heard. So I do encourage all children to speak up about issues that are affecting them, addressing them with adults and other influential people in their lives.
With this initiative, these students hope to contribute to the country's unity drive, as well as bring to light some of the pressing issues that also affect them and threaten their future. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Tema is the largest port in Ghana and an important cargo hub for West Africa. In 2016, the China Harbour Engineering Company began expanding the port. This section of the coastline is one of the main spawning grounds for sea turtles in West Africa. 5 of the world's 7 species of sea turtles breed there. However, their eggs are picked up by local poachers, or they're eaten by other animals, or accidentally trampled by people. In this harsh environment, the hatching rate can be as low as 30%. At the start of the project, the Chinese company set up an environmental protection department. Now there's also a breeding centre. Volunteers collect the scattered eggs and bring them back to hatch under protection. The centre can accommodate over 10,000 sea turtle eggs, and the hatching rate is almost 100%. To West Africa now, where Côte d'Ivoire's first Pan-African culinary training centre has recently been opened. The Ivorian French chef behind the initiative is serving up contemporary flavours and history lessons based on various African cuisines. CGTN's Daniela Persson now reports.
At the Panaf Culinary Institute in Abidjan, Chef Luc Dablé is teaching a group of students how to create the day's menu. Côte d'Ivoire's very first Pan-African cooking school also doubles up as a restaurant. But for Dablé, the history of each dish is just as important as its taste.
African cuisine needs to be recognized and celebrated. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to documenting our own cuisine, and especially in telling our stories. We should tell our own stories. We should not let others interpret our culture or our history.
Dablé spent years honing his skills abroad at international hotels and restaurants. Now, the French-Ivorian chef has returned home to fulfill a dream. His philosophy is simple: to make African cuisine accessible and to teach people what makes it unique.
This place is not only a food lab, but also a place where we explore the different culinary identities of Africa and the diaspora. What we all know is that there is no one general African cuisine. African cuisine does not exist, but rather African cuisines, and beyond that, we also show how the African continent has influenced other continents when it comes to cuisines.
Over the course of 6 months, aspiring chefs will learn about cooking and managing a kitchen. Every month, the students focus on a different theme. They learn about the history of African food and serve a variety of healthy African dishes, but with a modern twist.
For me, it's a discovery. I had forgotten a lot of African dishes, and now I am immersing myself in the African culinary universe, so it's a great advantage.
We really like the food that we were given. It's African cuisine reimagined. This place feels cosmopolitan and brings back memories like those from childhood. We enjoyed our time.
Chef Dablé says there's still a long way to go in terms of educating Africans about the need to use homegrown ingredients and recipes. He has also set up a foundation that trains youth and women to help reduce the growing unemployment rates. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
We begin with athletics.